6 a.m. in Chicago is quiet if you are high enough up. From the 50th floor of the penthouse, I designed the city looks less like a home and more like a circuit board. Cold, logical, and functioning exactly as intended. I was drinking my second espresso when my phone buzzed against the marble island. It was a text from my cousin alerting me to a post my sister Morgan had just made. She was announcing to the family group chat that she had hired a forensic auditor to finally expose my fraud at our grandmother's 80th birthday party. I did not drop my coffee. I did not call her screaming. I simply looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass, the face of the city's most reclusive billionaire architect, and felt a strange sense of calm. She wanted a war. She just did not realize she was standing in a house I had built. I tapped the screen once, forwarding the message to my head of legal with a 2-word instruction. Let her. Before we watch this house of cards fall, drop a comment below. Where in the world are you listening from right now? I always love seeing how far our community reaches. To understand why I did not stop her, you have to understand the architecture of my family. We did not have conversations, we had negotiations. We did not have love, we had leverage. 5 years ago, I sat at my parents' mahogany dining table in their Gothic estate in Lake Forest. It was a dark, suffocating room that smelled of old wax and judgment. I had just shown them the blueprints for my first solo project, a sustainable community center. My sister Morgan, who was fresh off a plane from Paris and wearing a dress that cost more than my tuition, snatched the paper from me. She laughed a sharp, brittle sound and called them cute little sketches. She asked if I was planning to build dollhouses. I looked at my parents, Joseph and Kelly. I waited for the defense. I waited for them to say Jordan is talented or even just, be nice. Instead, my father chuckled and poured more wine. My mother smiled that tight, thin smile and told me I should be grateful Morgan was honest enough to critique me. That was the moment the foundation cracked. You see, in families like mine, cruelty is not an accident. It is a policy. It is the trap of normalized cruelty. My parents did not pit us against each other because they hated us. In their twisted logic, they thought they were training us. They believed that affection made you soft and that humiliation made you bulletproof. They treated their children like gladiators in a private arena, tossing a single scrap of validation between us just to watch us tear each other apart for it. They thought they were raising survivors. But really they were just raising cannibals. I realized that night that I was not a daughter to them. I was a prop. I was the foil designed to make Morgan shine brighter. If I stayed, I would be consumed. So I did not make a scene. I did not throw my drink. I just stood up, walked out the front door, and never went back. For 5 years, I let them believe whatever narrative suited them. When I changed my number, they told people I was unstable. When I did not show up for holidays, they said I was ungrateful. When they heard rumors that I was living in the city, Morgan started telling the family I was a failure, probably waiting tables or working as an escort. They did not know that the architect, the pseudonym behind the Archon Group, the firm currently reshaping the Chicago skyline, was me. They did not know that while Morgan was spending her days curating an influencer lifestyle on Instagram, I was acquiring real estate portfolios. I built my empire in the shadows because silence was the only shield I had. But now the silence was over. Morgan had hired a forensic auditor to prove I was a fraud. She wanted to drag my finances into the light to disqualify me from Grandma Margaret's will. The irony was almost elegant. To pay for that auditor, she had to have dipped into the family funds money that technically partially belonged to me. She was funding her own execution with my inheritance. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the schematics of my next project, but today I had a different kind of demolition to plan. I was not going to stop Morgan from presenting her report. I was going to hand her the microphone. Because, in my line of work, you learn very quickly that if the foundation is rotten, you do not try to patch it. You let it collapse, and you build something better on the ruins. 3 days before the party, my assistant buzzed me. Hunter, the forensic auditor Morgan had hired, was in the lobby. He had not made an appointment, but he insisted it was urgent. I told her to send him up. When he walked into my office, he stopped dead 3 feet from the door. I watched his eyes scan the room, the minimalist Italian furniture, the architectural awards on the floating shelves, and finally, the view of the skyline. He looked at me sitting behind a desk made of a single slab of black granite, and I saw the exact moment his reality fractured. He had been hired to find a deadbeat sister living off scraps. Instead, he had walked into the office of a woman who could buy his entire firm with her quarterly bonus. "Please sit," I said. I did not stand up. I did not offer him water. Hunter sat on the edge of the chair, clutching a leather briefcase like a shield. He looked pale. He told me that when he took the job, he assumed it was a standard background check. Morgan had spun him a story about protecting the family legacy from an unstable relative. But when he started digging into the financials, the narrative collapsed. He opened his briefcase and pulled out 2 folders. One was thin and blue, the other was thick and red. He slid the blue one across the granite first. "This," he said, his voice tight, "is what your sister wants." I opened it. It was a fabrication. A carefully curated collection of rumors and misinterpretations designed to paint me as a high-end escort or a fraudster living on credit. It claimed my apartment was rented by a shell company, which was technically true since I owned the shell company, and that my income was untraceable. It was exactly the kind of lie Morgan needed to justify cutting me out of the will. Then he placed his hand on the red folder. He did not slide it over immediately. He looked at me and said that in the process of auditing the family trust to verify my potential access, he had found irregularities. Not with me, but with the trustee. I took the red folder. It was heavy. Inside were bank statements, transfer logs, and receipts. Morgan had not just been spending her allowance. She had been skimming from the charity gala funds she managed. $50,000 for Vintage Couture. $20,000 for a PR firm to get her into high society magazines. Another $80,000 wired to pay off credit cards that were maxed out from her last vacation. Hunter told me he had a legal obligation to report embezzlement, but he wanted to speak to me first because he realized who I really was. He realized I was not the villain of this story. I closed the folder. I looked at this man who had been sent to destroy me and saw that he was just a tool, a hammer that Morgan had swung too hard, unaware that she was hitting a landmine. I told him to give Morgan the blue folder. I told him to let her believe she had won. And then I asked him to bring the red folder to the party. He asked me why I would let her humiliate me publicly if I had the power to stop it right now. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool stone of my desk. Because I told him you do not interrupt an enemy when they are making a mistake. You let them finish. You let them sign their work. And then you present the bill. The invitation arrived by courier the next morning. It was heavy cardstock embossed with gold leaf smelling faintly of lavender and desperation. Grandma Margaret's 80th birthday. The venue was the family estate in Lake Forest, a Gothic revival mansion that loomed in my memory like a mausoleum. Morgan had included a handwritten note on the back. "Can't wait to see you. Try to wear something that does not look like you bought it at a discount rack." I did not feel anger. Anger is hot. It burns out. What I felt was the cold precision of a steel beam snapping into place. I opened my phone and typed a single word in response to the RSVP request: attending. Before the party, I had one stop to make. I drove out to Lake Forest a day early, but not to the house. I went to the private solarium at the back of the estate where Grandma Margaret spent her afternoons. Margaret was not a warm woman. She did not bake cookies or knit sweaters. She was the iron spine of our family, a woman who had managed the family fortune for 50 years and had little patience for weakness. She was pruning orchids when I walked in. She did not turn around immediately. She finished her cut, set down the shears, and then looked at me with eyes that were sharp and clear. She asked me if I was ready. I realized then that I had not needed to tell her. Margaret saw everything. She knew about the trust fund withdrawals. She knew about the gaps in the charity accounts. She had been watching Morgan's frantic spending for months, waiting to see if anyone else would notice. I told her about the auditor. I told her that Morgan was planning to present a report to the entire family accusing me of fraud to distract from her own theft. I told her I intended to let it happen. Margaret walked over to a small iron table and poured 2 cups of tea. She did not tell me to be kind. She did not tell me to spare my sister. She handed me the cup and said 4 words that sealed Morgan's fate. A rot must be exposed. We sat there for an hour, finalizing the choreography of the evening. It was not a conversation between a grandmother and a granddaughter. It was a strategy session between 2 generals. We agreed that silence was our strongest weapon. If we warned the parents, Joseph and Kelly, they would try to cover it up. They would sweep Morgan's crimes under the rug to protect the family name, just like they had swept away my dignity for years. No, this had to be public. It had to be absolute. As I drove back to the city to prepare, the sun was setting over the lake, casting long shadows across the water. I thought about the dress I had bought for the occasion. It was not from a discount rack. It was a custom architectural piece, sharp lines and midnight blue silk, costing more than the car Morgan drove. I was not going there to attend a party. I was going there to preside over a demolition. The dynamite was laid. The fuse was lit. All I had to do was walk through the door and wait for the explosion. Walking into my parents' estate felt like stepping into a vacuum. The air was thin, scented with expensive perfume and old money anxiety. The ballroom was packed with the Chicago elite people who measured worth in lineage and liquidity. I wore the midnight blue silk dress, its sharp architectural lines cutting through the sea of pastels and lace. When I entered, the conversation did not stop, but the pitch changed. I felt the eyes. They were looking for the stain, the failure, the prodigal daughter returning to be shamed. My mother Kelly intercepted me near the champagne tower. She looked me up and down, her expression tight. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask where I had been for 5 years. She adjusted the strap of my dress and whispered that I should try to stay in the back out of the photos. She said Morgan had worked very hard on the aesthetic of the evening, and we did not want any distractions. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had given her in a decade. I told her I would not dream of distracting anyone. I was just here to watch. Morgan found me 10 minutes later. She was vibrating with manic energy, clutching a microphone like a weapon. She leaned in close, smelling of champagne and malice, and told me she hoped I had a good lawyer, because after tonight I would not even be able to afford a bus ticket out of town. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the cracks in the porcelain. She was terrified. She was a girl who had spent her entire life running on a treadmill of validation, and she was exhausted. I almost felt pity. Almost. At 8 o'clock the lights dimmed. A massive screen descended from the ceiling behind the stage. Morgan stepped into the spotlight. She began her speech talking about integrity and protecting the family legacy. She spoke about how hard it was to be the responsible one, the one who carried the burden of the family name while others squandered it. She signaled to the tech booth. The screen flickered to life. She announced that she had hired an independent auditor to ensure the family trust was secure, and in the process, she had uncovered a heartbreaking truth about her sister. She paused for effect, looking directly at me with a mask of feigned sorrow. She said she had no choice but to present the findings to the family council assembled here. She clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. It was the cover page of Hunter's report. Morgan did not look at the screen. She was too busy watching the audience, waiting for the gasps of horror at my alleged prostitution or fraud. But the room did not gasp. It went dead silent. Morgan faltered. She turned around slowly to look at the screen. It was not a mugshot. It was not a foreclosure notice. It was a corporate valuation document from the Illinois Department of Commerce. In bold black letters, it read, Archon Group Holdings. Sole proprietor Jordan. Total assets under management, $400 million. For a moment, nobody moved. My father Joseph dropped his glass. It shattered, but the sound was swallowed by the thick carpet. Morgan stared at the numbers. She blinked, trying to make them change, trying to force reality back into the shape she wanted. She read the line aloud, her voice shaking, asking if this was a joke. She looked at me, eyes wide, unable to comprehend that the sister she thought was a failure had bought and sold her entire world 3 times over. Panic is a fascinating thing to watch in real time. It strips away the polish. Morgan did not step down. She did not apologize. She doubled down. She started hitting the remote, frantically clicking to the next slide, shouting that there was a mistake, that the auditor had found real dirt, that I was a liar. She clicked again. The screen changed. The blue folder content was gone. In its place was the red folder content, the slide I had instructed Hunter to prepare. It was a bank statement. At the top, it listed the account holder, the Morgan Foundation for Children. Below that, highlighted in brutal, unforgiving red, were the outgoing transfers. $50,000 to a Parisian couture house, $20,000 to a luxury travel agency, $80,000 to personal credit card settlement. The room did not just go silent this time. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. This was not just a family scandal. This was a crime. The people in this room were donors. They had written checks to that foundation. They were looking at their own money, realizing it had not gone to orphans or hospitals. It had gone to the dress Morgan was wearing right now. I watched my sister on that stage, and I saw something deeper than just fear of arrest. I saw the empty wallet delusion. You see, Morgan did not just steal because she liked nice things. She stole because she did not exist without them. She was a narcissist in the truest sense. She had no self. She was a collection of expensive labels and social approval held together by gravity. Without the money, without the image, she was not just broke. She was annihilated. She was staring at the screen, and she was not seeing numbers. She was seeing her own death. Grandma Margaret stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor was like a gavel strike. She did not walk to the stage. She simply stood by her table, leaning on her cane, her face made of stone. She asked Morgan in a voice that carried to every corner of the room if she had stolen from the children. My mother Kelly tried to intervene. She stood up, rushing toward Margaret, babbling about a misunderstanding about clerical errors. She tried to shield Morgan just like she had done for 20 years. But the evidence was 20 feet tall and glowing. I signaled Hunter. He was standing by the bar looking somber. He stepped forward into the light. He introduced himself as the forensic auditor hired by Morgan. He confirmed that the documents were authentic. He confirmed that the money was gone. Morgan made a sound, a low, keen noise like a wounded animal. She looked at the crowd, at the friends she had tried to impress, at the parents she had tried to emulate. They were all backing away. The social elite were already pulling out their phones, not to donate but to tweet. The circle was closing. She looked at me last. She looked for the sister she used to bully the one who would step in and take the blame to keep the peace. But that sister was not there. There was only the architect standing amidst the demolition, watching the dust settle. I did not say a word. I did not have to. The structure had collapsed under its own weight. The aftermath was not a battle. It was a cleanup operation. Morgan took a plea deal. Her lawyer, paid for by selling her vintage couture collection, advised her that a jury would not look kindly on a socialite who stole from orphans to fund her wardrobe. She is currently serving 18 months in a minimum security facility. The last time I saw her in the courtroom, she was not wearing designer silk. She was wearing a generic gray suit, and for the first time in her life, she looked exactly like everyone else. My parents, Joseph and Kelly, faced a different kind of sentence. They were not charged criminally, but in their world, social death is worse than prison. The club memberships were revoked. The dinner invitations stopped coming. They were forced to list the Lake Forest estate to pay for Morgan's legal fees and the restitution to the charity. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo in the suburbs, far away from the whispers of the elite they had spent their lives trying to impress. 6 months after the party, I drove back to the estate one last time. I was not there to visit. I was there as the owner. I had bought the property through a blind trust. My parents never knew the money that saved them from bankruptcy came from the daughter they had discarded. I stood in the main foyer listening to the silence. The furniture was gone. The portraits were down. The house that had once felt like a fortress now just felt like a large, drafty building made of wood and stone. I walked into the dining room, the room where I had been mocked, where I had been told I was worthless. I ran my hand along the wall. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel triumph. I felt the quiet satisfaction of a builder who has finally cleared a site for new construction. You see, there is a concept I call the justice of the planter. Most people think justice is about punishment, about burning down the enemy's crops. But true justice, the kind that lasts, is about what you plant in the ashes. If I had just destroyed Morgan and my parents, I would still be defined by them. I would still be the victim who got even. But I am an architect. I do not just demolish. I build. I did not buy this house to live in it. I bought it to gut it. I had already drawn up the plans. The Gothic arches would be replaced with glass. The dark hallways would be open to the light. The Archon Group was converting the estate into the new headquarters for the Blueprint Scholarship, a fully funded program for underprivileged architecture students who had the talent but lacked the means. This house, which had been a monument to exclusion and cruelty, was going to become a factory for dreams. I was taking the broken bricks of my family's legacy and using them to build a foundation for kids who had been told, just like I was, that they did not belong. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The sun was rising, reflecting off the water in a blinding sheet of gold. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt clean. I was not the invisible daughter anymore. I was not the scapegoat. I was Jordan. I was the builder. And for the first time in my life, I was home. If you believe in building a legacy that speaks for itself, hit that like button and share this story. Let's remind the world that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy.